everyone. I'm going to call the CAMPO board to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Chair Bagwell.
Here.
Vice Chair Schutte.
Here.
Member McQuarrie. Here. Member Novak.
Here.
Member Dodson.
Here.
Member Henderson. Member Noasad. A quorum's present.
Thank you so much. I see that Member Henderson appears to be online. He may not have been able to get his speaker working, but I can see him signed in, so maybe, yes, to mark him present. Thank you so very much. We're going to move on to agenda item number 3. He chimed in.
This is Wes. I'm here, yes.
Thank you. We're going to move to public comment. Is there anyone on the line?
There are no callers on the line at this time.
Thank you. Do I have any members of the public here in person that wish to speak? Seeing none, great. We're going to move on to agenda item number 4, which is approval of our minutes of January 12th, 2022. Do I have any corrections? Seeing none, noted. May I have a motion, please?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
May I have a second?
I second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of January 12th, 2022. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move to agenda item 5A, which is a discussion-only item, a presentation by the Nevada Department of Transportation concerning our sustainable transportation funding study and the advisory working group. I see Sandra already queued up and ready to go. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And Chris.
No, you're good. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this item, Sandra and I are going to tag team this. I'm going to give a little introductory section and then turn it over to Sandra. But quick background. So the Nevada Legislature 2021 session passed Assembly Bill 413, which required NDOT to convene a advisory working group, or AWG, to study funding long-term sustainable funding for infrastructure. And so I'll dive into the presentation. We'll get into the details as we go through here. So we'll cover through this presentation kind of a background of the need in the transportation system. We'll cover sort of the working group and the members of the working group and the purpose of the working group. We'll go through some of the guiding principles that are being used to evaluate and the different alternatives and how we're going to get to those recommendations in the study. And then we'll talk about next steps for the working group. So I think as this board is well aware, as well as the Regional Transportation Commission, we know that there have been increased pressure on the transportation system here in Nevada. Nevada's population has grown approximately 15% from 2010 census to the 2020 census. CAMPO in particular has remained relatively flat, but other areas such as Washoe County and RTC Southern Nevada and Clark County, those areas have grown quite a bit. Construction costs are up quite a bit as well, 15% from 2020 to 2021, and that's a one-year period. I think we're continuing to see that in the industry going forward, and as we have more contracts coming to the Regional Transportation Commission, I think we'll start to see those construction contracts increase for a variety of reasons. In addition to that, our vehicle miles traveled across the state are also increasing. They're up 34%, again, from 2010 to 2020. Those are continuing to be a result of more people in the state who are driving cars and trips generally being longer than they were previously. So we're seeing that increase in all sectors: population, vehicle miles traveled, and construction costs. And our revenue sources aren't keeping up with some of those demands on our transportation system. So specifically, where are we currently getting funding today? Gas tax remains the single largest source of transportation funding in Nevada. On a statewide level, 42% of fuel taxes go to the state, 34% of taxes on vehicles, such as registration fees and motor carrier fees and license fees, go to transportation needs in the state. And then 24% of all the other taxes, such as through the DMV and the public safety and other various taxes and fees, are applied to transportation sources throughout Nevada.
May I interrupt just to ask a question so I was clear on this slide, because I may be misinterpreting it or I misheard what you said. The 100% of funding available for transportation is 42% from fuel tax, 34, because not 42% of fuel taxes go to the state. I need to understand what the slide's telling me. This is the portion of where we get the money that funds?
That's correct. This
Okay.
slide is,
Okay.
sorry, Chris.
No.
That's
This
okay. I
slide
was like,
is
no, no,
where
no,
the-
he said that wrong. I
the
got it.
state-
Okay.
Backwards.
The
Yes.
state revenue, and I put Chris on the spot in terms of,
Thank
we
you.
put together this presentation. I was like, hey, let's share it. So this is the
Okay.
funding makeup that goes to the transportation
percentage.
system at the state
State
level.
level.
Perfect.
State level.
42% is from fuel taxes, 34% is taxes on
Correct.
vehicles. Okay.
At the state level.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Much better. I was like, something's not
So-
right here.
But on the local level,
There you go. He's going to say this one right.
at Carson City, we pay approximately 52 cents a gallon in gas taxes. 18 cents is our federal share, which goes to the federal government. 18.6 cents goes to the state tax, and 15.3 is our local regional transportation tax. Of that 15 cents, the pie chart there on the lower portion shows where the funding is distributed to different city areas. 9 cents to the Regional Transportation Commission Fund, which is what funds the RTC board and our district projects and our capital transportation projects here in Carson City. Transportation revenue, right, is as we've mentioned, is not keeping up. And you can see from this particular slide, vehicle miles traveled in the green line have increased over the past 10 years. Fuel tax revenue to the state fund, and this is a statewide graph as well, was increasing at a little bit slower pace, but the pandemic of 2020 and the decrease in drivers and vehicles on the roads has decreased our revenue from a fuel tax perspective. More similarly here on a local level in Carson City, the blue line is the current number of miles of city-owned and maintained streets. We're approximately 303 miles, which is an increase of 28% since 2000. So our network has increased. Our gas tax revenue, on the other hand, has actually decreased 1% in that same 21-year period. Again, you can see from 2020, 2021, the decrease as a result of likely the pandemic. And construction costs are continuing to increase. They're up 91% again in that same 21-year period. And so we're seeing inflation, and I would imagine that the 2021 and 2022 points on this green line will probably be more of a steeper trend than the previous 2019 to 2020.
Chris, a question on this one. The city-owned streets going up 28%. Was a lot of that from taking over NDOT roadways?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of locations that have increased that roadway network. And I think NDOT's one of those locations, yeah.
Okay, thanks. That's what I thought.
On a fuel efficiency standpoint, we're seeing a reduction in revenue generated because of more fuel-efficient vehicles and the increase of electrification or other alternative fuels on our transportation system, on our fleet. And essentially in 2010, it looks like it was approximately 1.28 cents per mile. That's the general cost of driving your car. Today in 2020, it's approximately 1.303 cents per mile to drive your car. I think there's some notes in the background of this presentation that in 1994, it was approximately 3.4 cents. And that was the kind of the perspective we were getting. So you can see how that
More and
decline
more
has
efficient.
occurred over time. Yep. So I'm going to turn it over to Sandra to talk a little bit more specific about the project, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Sandra Rosenberg, Assistant Director of Planning at NDOT, for the record. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about this today, because it is something we're really diving into and excited about, but it's certainly not easy. So as Chris mentioned, in the 2021 session, Assembly Bill 413 directed NDOT to convene an advisory working group to study transportation needs of the state and recommend sustainable transportation funding. This was kind of a follow-up from the SCR3 that passed in 2019. That was a more kind of ad hoc look with a broad group of stakeholders. And that one initially was focused on the electrification. We want to support electric vehicles for a variety of reasons, but understanding that hurts our ability to fund the transportation system. As that group met, they realized how complex this issue is, and it's not just about EVs. It is, overall fuel economy and the restrictive language we have in terms of the funding that we do have that comes to NDOT. So we have a constitutional provision that requires it to be spent on highways construction and maintenance. So in addition to looking at this revenue challenge, the bill also required us to look at a number of other factors that factor into this, including our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, equity, user fairness, smart growth principles, land use, and they gave us a little over a year to do all of that. So, so it's been a challenge, but we're up for the challenge. We're excited. We did convene this working group. And next, oh, you're already there. You're ahead of me. So the legislative study it's an examination of the financial sustainability of the state highway fund that must be undertaken, and the recommendations must be included in the final report due to the legislature at the end of this calendar year. This must include an assessment of at least 2 alternative transportation funding approaches that have been identified. Those are Utah's model of a road usage charge, and then the NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, got to get those acronyms, had a proposal as well that had more to do with energy use as a metric, but still kind of a usage fee type mechanism. We're looking at those 2 models, but we're not just looking at those 2 models. We're looking at a broad range of mechanisms to fund the future of transportation. Consistent with AB 413, new approaches to multimodal transportation funding for all users must take into account the need to improve social equity, user equity, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, the role that land use and smart growth strategies can play must be considered. So as I just mentioned, we're taking on a lot, and it's not just about fixing the sort of hole in the highway fund. It's a broader charge than that. So we have we convened a 29-member advisory working group that aligns a broad range of stakeholders together at the table to have these conversations. It includes all of the metropolitan planning organizations. So Chris sits on it for CAMPO, and we have members from the other MPOs as well. We have tax experts, we have clean energy experts, we have a number of other state agencies, local agencies through NACO and League of Cities, labor, chambers of commerce. So it was really a broad range of stakeholders in a reasonable number of members to actually get the work done. Making sure I'm catching everything. We also made sure that the membership represented a broad geographic representation of the state. So there's a number of members in Southern Nevada and Northern Nevada, as well as some rural representation as well. So this is our schedule for the study and the meetings of the working group. We started in July of last year, shortly after the ending of the legislature, to kind of get organized, make sure everyone understood kind of the charge we had in front of us and the situation we're in and why we're here. And then we got right into the thick of it, understanding the magnitude of the challenge. In September and November, we got into the revenue principles, which are really important to set what are we trying to achieve here, and how are we going to measure success, how are we going to measure the different mechanisms in terms of what's most effective in meeting our charge. And so we did adopt those, and then since then we've been looking at the various mechanisms and measuring those against those principles. In January, we met with a number of alternative mechanisms. We had almost 30 of them initially. We were hoping to reduce that number significantly. We reduced it very slightly, but we had a very robust conversation with the advisory working group, who felt that they needed more analysis before taking too many of them off the table, because the challenge is large, and it does relate to so many other issues that touch transportation, but may not be solely transportation. So what our consultants are helping us right now is bundling those, finding a combination of those mechanisms that help meet the need we have, the sufficiency of the need we have, as well as the flexibility for what we might need in the future. We're going to bring those back at our next meeting in March and have a robust discussion about that. And then we're going to talk about right sizing and start writing the report. Okay. So I mentioned the guiding principles. These are really aspirational outcomes. What would we like to achieve in a perfect world? And they serve as a ruler to measure the different funding mechanisms the degree to which each mechanism can achieve that desired outcome. None of them are perfect. None of them score high on all of the principles. Otherwise, we probably would have done this a long time ago. But again, looking for that combination and, of different mechanisms. So we did, the AWG members crafted and unanimously adopted the principles in November. Next slide. And here they are. I know that might be a little tough to see, but those principles are financial sustainability, sufficiency, user equity, social equity, flexibility, greenhouse gas emissions, and transparency and efficiency and ease of compliance.
You didn't get a good acronym out of that. You guys didn't
No,
work hard
I
enough in
didn't
that
even-
committee. We need
That's,
more
that's a point. I will bring that
initials.
feedback back. But we did look at we put these in an order that they could sort of be paired, because we get a lot of questions about, well, what's the difference between financial sustainability and sufficiency? And so we want to make sure it's a revenue mechanism that can generate enough for now and the future, but also that sustainability in terms of future-proofing it with future emerging travel trends, technologies, again, the transition to electric vehicles, but really being able to be flexible on, how travel might change in the future. We don't want to have to go back and do this every couple of years. Similarly, user equity and social equity. One has to do with who's paying and who's benefiting, and the other has to do with really the distributional impact on historically underserved and low-income communities. Flexibility, that one is critically important because, as I mentioned, we don't currently have that. The money that does come to the state DOT is fairly limited in terms of what it can be spent on. And, there's a discussion that there may be a broader role in transportation for the state DOT if we had a more flexible funding source. We have a greenhouse gas, we have greenhouse gas targets for the state, so we want to be in line with that. And then the transparency and efficiency and ease of compliance. So we don't want something that's so complicated that no one can understand, or that costs more to implement than we're getting out of it. So next slide. And this is the believe it or not, slightly shortened, but still very long list of mechanisms. The AWG members really had a lot of questions and concerns about many of the options. So the consultant team gathered those in terms of what did they like or don't like, or what were the competing opinions on that, and are now compiling those into groups, buckets of projects that can meet the guiding principles. And we'll come back with those. So those various different options range from a variety of different fuel taxes. That can vary, by inflation or price of fuel or sales tax, a number of different ways to tax the fuel itself. A number of different ways to add fees to vehicle fees like registration, adding a weight-based fee, a fuel economy fee, engine type, age, a number of different mechanisms that get to kind of that fuel economy and like the use of the road and adjusting for different factors. Usage-based fees, distance-based charge for light-duty vehicles, that's also known as a RUC, a road usage charge, or a VMT fee, as well as potentially a weight distance-based charge for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. We want to make sure we're looking at all of the road users, which oftentimes people associate that with vulnerable road users, which is certainly something we're concerned about, but also not just light-duty vehicles, not just our cars, but also the freight vehicles that are on the roads. Indirect usage-based fees, such as tax on batteries, tires, or electricity consumed for EVs. Other mechanisms that were considered that might be a little more complicated, but still, the group felt it was important to further that analysis at least. Value-added tax on goods movements, parcel delivery fees, rideshare surcharges, cordon charges in urban areas. So you would have an area designated for that additional charge, and that could be collected in a number of different ways, including parking. Like you might have a parking rate in a certain area. The more advanced mechanism is like if you go to London or certain other areas across the world, as soon as you enter that area, there's an additional charge that gets sent to you. So, there's a range of alternatives within that mechanism. Carbon tax, street utility fee, payroll tax, land use impact fees, and a broad, other general funds. The street utility fee and land use fees get to sort of, everyone who, lives and works in an area benefits from the transportation system, and how do we create a fairness there, and that decisions are based on, the true impact there. So again, some of these may not be recommended. It's going to be some combination of these. It won't be all of them, and it's going to be more than one. That's what we know right now, but working towards that. Okay. And the next step, so I kind of went through the schedule earlier, but the next handful of meetings are going to be critically important. Our next meeting is in March. We're going to go through those options, those combination of mechanism options to both meet, the amount we need as well as how to roll it out. One thing we're looking at is a combination of near-term and long-term investment strategies, because some of these mechanisms may have a long lead time to be able to implement, and so some combination of what we can do now versus in the future. So those will be discussed in March, and then continue the discussion in April to look at right sizing and furthering that discussion of the packaging and potentially the rates, depending on if the advisory working group wants to get into that detail or provide more broad recommendations to the legislature. We're hoping that our last meeting of the advisory working group is in June to wrap up the recommendations, and then we'll work on finalizing that report to legislature. We do have the opportunity to hold a couple more meetings if we need to. I should note that all of the meetings are, so far we've been holding them in 2 physical locations as well as a virtual option, although we strongly encourage all of the members to join in person in Carson and Las Vegas. The next 2 meetings, we're going to have everyone in the same location, because we feel that these conversations they've all been important, but these are really critical where we're making some really important decisions. We want to make sure we're hearing from every member about their opportunities and concerns about some of these mechanisms. So the March meeting will be in Las Vegas. The April meeting will be in Carson City. These meetings are broadcast live as well as a recording that's available on the website. I do want to note that while NDOT is facilitating this, we do have this group that's helping us make these recommendations. The group will be making recommendations to legislature. Legislature will decide what to do with those recommendations. They could take them and run with them. They could do nothing. They could do something different than what is in the report. Our job is to do the analysis and invite all of the stakeholder opinions so that we give them the best information to go from there. Okay, and with that, that's the website that you can get more information, including all of the meeting materials, recordings of prior meetings, minutes, those sorts of things. And then we have a centralized email address if you have questions. Of course, you can always contact myself as well. And with that, do you have any questions?
So just in general, a comment or a discussion item, and maybe that's already been done at the working group level. So one of my overall concerns, and I certainly sit on some other committees with Sandra where we look at transportation needs. And my concern is, unless I'm missing something in this, is you're solving for the state level. And I looked at that laundry list of 25 particular options, and I think a disappointment for me is that they not be opened up to fund the local roads, and that we're going to be honestly tripping over one another, right? Because I need it for local roads. So I don't know if there's a way when you're in your discussion points on the 25 different opportunities to raise revenue, that they include how that's going to impact the ability for the local governments to raise their revenue, or that you are recommending legislation that duals that. So if I don't care which one you pick, vehicle miles traveled, let's say you guys selected that as a highlight, that you advocate for sufficient answer to meet both needs, so that they're not just solving for the state, but that you also recognize you're solving for the local government. And I think if this working group does not do that, it's really a disservice to the entire transportation system. And I feel like you'll get more pushback during the legislative session because there's never a way for us to solve it. And so I think we have to join hands in this and do this together and be able to come together as the MPOs and all of the local governments in the state to say we want to solve the road infrastructure for everyone. So if there's any opportunity to carry that forward, to look at recommendations that are good for both and
So
that they open up.
Yep, I am absolutely thrilled to hear you say that because that's a concern across the state. I mean, certainly the ones that are probably most actively looking at this are the Tahoe region and Southern Nevada as well.
Right.
And there is this concern that, we may be competing against each
We
other
are.
in the legislature. And that is certainly not our intent. We definitely want to work with everyone, and whether it's, and we had, when we had the discussion about all of those mechanisms, there was a discussion about, is this a state mechanism or a local mechanism?
It's both, or I believe it's both.
We're also having conversations about, does it all go to the state and some of it get allocated locally? So we haven't solved for that yet. I want to be very clear. We're not yet making that recommendation, but it's definitely a consideration for us. In fact, some of the other metropolitan areas are, waning a little bit in the support for this, for that very concern. But if we have the same concern, if we solve locally but not statewide, we're going to continue to have an issue. So I agree that as we discuss this combination of mechanisms, we may not be solving for the local, but we want to be doing it in a way that opens up opportunities for local entities and not closes them off. We may get to a point where it is a joint recommendation where there's state and local revenues. Some of the AWG members have not really been supportive of that because they said, hey, this challenge is big enough at the state. But I agree with you. I think we need to look at all of it and at least have some joint recommendations.
If
even
you're
if
going to
it's
raise a
not,
tax by 10%, I just don't understand why it wouldn't be 11% with 1% going locally. I mean, that's all I'm really trying to drive home is I don't care when you raise a tax. I don't care whether it's at the state level or the local level. It's painful.
right.
Right? And we're all going to go through the very same exercises to determine which group do I want to hurt the most. That's a reality. Where do you put the emphasis on which charge? Who is that going to impact? Right? Because
Correct.
depending on
Yep.
where you put the tax, it has the impact to which group. So I understand all of that. I'm just saying that I just don't understand why we can't solve it together. I just really would like to emphasize that. And maybe others have general comments
We'll certainly
to.
bring that
Thank you.
back, and I appreciate that perspective because that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Like I said, others are a little more fearful that it's one or the other, and I don't think that's successful for any of us.
It isn't.
So I appreciate you bring, and I'll bring that back to the
Thank
team
you.
to make sure we talk about it next.
Sandra, question, does the state get a portion of the fuel revenue indexing in Clark and Washoe? And is that in the mix? Because I think each county has a different level right now, right?
Right. So that's a great question. In Washoe County, the RTC of Washoe County gets the full amount of the indexing on the federal, state, and local portion. In Clark County, the RTC gets the index on the federal and local portion, and the index on the state portion does come to the state, but it must be spent in that county. The indexing measure did not pass in any other county.
Correct.
And then another follow-up on the electric vehicle end. We have electric cars right now, and we expect to have electric pickups real soon, right?
Yes.
So how much do they pay right now compared to gasoline powered, or,
Nothing.
what does a typical electric vehicle pay compared to a gasoline powered vehicle?
Zero.
Only
Only in the car registration. Yeah.
Right. In fees that go to pay for the system or overall operating?
Overall,
I don't have that in front of me, but it is significantly less. Yeah. It's a higher, higher upfront cost, lower
To
operating
purchase
co-
the
to
vehicle
purchase
in the
the
first
vehicle,
place. Right.
and then it costs less to operate, which is one of our concerns about equity on both the user as well as social side.
Right.
Those that can most afford to buy into that market are paying less just out of pocket to operate their vehicle, but also paying less into the system that we all use, which puts a burden on those that can least afford it.
And as the price of all vehicles go up, the registration fee DMV gets should be growing pretty quick, right?
Yes.
You're not keeping up with inflation, but the cars are sure exceeding it, right?
Because they only get a percentage based on the value of the vehicle. That's correct.
There's
But
a
that grows.
portion, there's a flat registration fee, and then there's the value-based, the GST.
Well, the government tax piece is based on approximately 4% of the value, but a couple of counties also have a little
Yeah.
slightly different answers there too.
And an interesting note on that portion that's based on the value is not restricted in the same way as the basic registration or the fuel tax.
Correct.
Which is both good and bad. It makes it more flexible for us. It also makes it subject to go into the general fund, which happens often.
Yep. It certainly comes into the local governments too as a general fund. So, yep. Okay.
Sandra, I looked through some of the meeting minutes and materials, and a lot of good information in there. I guess along the lines of the mayor's comment, I couldn't really discern from the materials that may be in there, but what is your goal for revenue generation? And it would seem like it would be difficult to get to the overall needs for this revenue. When we consider all the county, I know we did some work to determine what it would take to get our street maintenance funds up to a standard that, was reasonable. And that's a number out there. And I don't think that the group probably collected that number. So is the revenue goal solely on the state system needs?
So yes and no. If you look at the materials from the very first meeting, we did kind of identify some of that unfunded need. That state system calculations are that we are at about a $530 million per year shortfall. About more than half of it is a backlog in maintenance, preservation, and operations, about $260 million. I'm glad I looked at these numbers today. Then there's, when we did the calculations, this was back during SCR3, so a couple years ago, the two large MPOs, RTCs, were asked to give a presentation, but CAMPO and TRPA were not. So we included in our estimates, not all of your roadway needs, but on the transit shortfall we did. So including rural transit, Carson and Tahoe, that was about $25 million. That was only based on unfunded applications, not a full assessment of needs. And then we estimated based on slightly outdated but still useful bicycle plans around the state, about a $25 million per year shortfall in bicycle infrastructure. And then the rest of that, about $220 million in capacity needs. We have shied away from providing a detailed list, a project list, if you will, because that changes, and it's not a matter of, from the state perspective, it's not a matter of whether or not we're going to deliver certain projects. It's a matter of when. And so we looked at the projects that were out several years and thought, okay, how quickly could we deliver it if money were available? And that's what that's based on. That number could change, and this is where it gets complicated. One, that's part of the concern about solving for the local as well. The number gets so big that it's difficult to solve for. However, as we look at next month, we're also going to be talking about the land use and transportation nexus. So if we're making different decisions on what grows our network, if we have a more flexible fund source to fund transit and active transportation, that number could go down. if we're making different choices in how we grow our community and what we fund in transportation. So that 530 is our current kind of target. It is flexible. It's also, what can we raise? And if the realistic number is less than that, we have a data-driven prioritization process, as CAMPO does, as the other MPOs do, and we prioritize. And it may be that we spend a bigger portion of our funding on preservation and maintenance, and our capacity projects get reduced. And so it's that number is important, but it's not as important as those trade-offs and those policy decisions and what, who we're willing to charge and how much so that we can sustain a system.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This was a presentation-only item. If you have comment,
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay.
I apologize for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I got all excited when I read the title of the item. We're going to find funding for sustainable transportation. and then I started reading it, and I realized that wasn't quite what it was about. And you do in here mention multimodal and greenhouse gas emission reductions, but it's all about road funding, essentially, with a little bit of bicycle and transit. And what's, I think, notably missing is rail. The state has a rail plan, and it's quite a good plan. And the federal bipartisan infrastructure law has $66 billion for rail, but you have to apply for it. It needs a champion, which can be local, state, or, basically that's what the option is. And I would think for Nevada, state, NDOT makes the most sense, since most rail is more than just local jurisdiction. And in the plan, there are a number of projects, sort of, I don't know if they're exactly prioritized, but anyway, there's things like extending the Capital Corridor from Auburn to Reno, and things like, more stops on the California Zephyr and in Wendover and Battle Mountain, for example, and things like that aren't hugely expensive. But I really think that even though the study is looking at long-term road financing, we need to have a little something in there about rail, because even though that bill's only 5 years, it's an opportunity that we don't want to miss, in my opinion. So I would encourage NDOT and the state to apply for some of this federal money.
So there are thank you for that, and we will certainly bring that message back, and you're not the first person to mention rail either. One of the challenges, and we are looking at policy changes as well. There are current laws that limit our ability to work in that rail space. If we can generate a more flexible funding source, that opens up the opportunity not just for bike, ped, bus, but it does open that opportunity for rail. NDOT is unlikely to take an ownership role over rail, but if we have some more flexibility, our ability to help match some of those federal grants and work with those rail providers does open up. So it's not explicitly stated there, and we'll make sure that comes into the report as well. But it does, that flexibility is really, it is the measure I'm very concerned about, because if we don't have a flexible fund source, all we can fund is roads. And so by building in that flexibility, it does provide that opportunity to at least partner on some of those projects you're talking about.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to move on from this item. Thank you so very much for your presentation. We're going to move on to agenda item 5B, which is our action item for setting our annual safety performance targets. We do this every year, and so it looks to me like we're going to consider whether or not we just want to adopt the state standard on this item. I can almost do this one all by myself. It's an annual one. But Kelly, go ahead and give us just a brief overview on this, please.
Thank you. Kelly Norman, Transportation Planner. Annually, the Nevada Department of Transportation establishes state safety performance targets in accordance with the Code of Federal Regulation 23-490.209. CAMPO is required to either support the state's targets or establish its own specific safety targets within the CAMPO boundary. The Federal Highway Administration Safety Performance Measures Final Rule requires states to set safety performance targets in the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HSIP, annual report. There are 5 performance measures: the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities, the number of serious injuries, the rate of serious injuries, the number of non-motorized fatalities, and non-motorized serious injuries. The Fatality Analysis Reporting System, or FARS, and the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA, provide the data for measuring fatalities and serious injuries. The state's Highway Safety Improvement Program establishes targets for 2021 on August 31st, 2021. Therefore, Nevada MPOs must establish targets for 2021 by February 27th, 2022. Each MPO establishes their performance targets for each of the 5 measures no later than 180 days after the state submits its annual targets. There is no fiscal impact for CAMPO meeting or not meeting these safety targets. At the February 10th, 2021 CAMPO board meeting, CAMPO weighed the options of continuing to utilize CAMPO-specific targets as it had in years past, as opposed to supporting the state's targets. CAMPO ultimately decided it preferred to support the state's targets and adopted the state's 2020 safety performance targets. Staff recommend that CAMPO again support the state's targets, specifically the 2021 Nevada State Safety Performance Targets as presented in the 2020 Nevada Highway Safety Improvement Program, as shown on the table on packet page 22 and in Exhibit 1, starting on packet page 23. That concludes my comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? It's our pretty routine answer we do all the time. So if I don't have any questions, I will accept a motion. Mr. Dotson, did you want to make a motion? So, but you're both reaching.
I move to support the Nevada State Safety Performance Targets for 2021.
And I would like to,
second
let him do it. Okay.
On discussion, did all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. And just on discussion, we may bring this back in the future as an item just to adopt this as a policy. I was reading the agenda title, and since we limited that to 2021, I don't think I can do it in this meeting, but please next year bring it back as just a standard adoption methodology. And that way, only if you want us to do something different. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I actually read the title, darn it. Yeah, thank you so very much. Great job. We're going to move on to agenda item number 6. Mr. Martinovich, do you have anything to report in item 6?
I do not have any items to report this month in item 6. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then, Steph, nothing else. Then we're on final public comment. Is there anyone on the telephone?
There are no callers on the line at this time.
Thank you so very much. Do you have any final public comment in the audience today? Seeing none, that's great. We're going to go ahead and adjourn as CAMPO, and we're going to take just like a 2-minute switch over to go to RTC and let those leave that are CAMPO oriented. Thank you for a good meeting. We'll be right back. Okay. If we can call the meeting back to order, please. Thank you. Okay. So the RTC meeting is called to order. May I please have a roll call?
Oops,
Here.
sorry, Chair Bagwell.
Here.
Vice Chair Schutte.
Here.
Member Dotson. Member McQuarrie. Member Novak.
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to agenda item number 3, which is our public comment. Do we have anyone on the telephone?
There are no callers on the line at this time.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to come to public comment? Seeing none, we're going to move on to agenda item number 4 for approval of our minutes of January 12th, 2022 as corrected. Mr. Novak, welcome to our team. Did anybody else have any updates? If not, I'll accept a motion for approval as amended.
Just present, it's listed as Greg Stedfield.
Yeah, that was the correction.
Oh, that's the correction. Okay, I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll move to approve the minutes of January the 12th, 2022 for the RTC.
A second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes with the addition of Mr. Novak. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We're going to move on to agenda item 5A, which is action regarding our annual submission and certification. That is a great word, to NDOT for our road numbers. Again, we have to do it once a year. Kelly, you want to just give us our grand totals?
Oh, sure. Kelly Norman, Transportation Planner, NDOT requests that each county or incorporated city identify improved roads. It maintains and certifies the total centerline miles of those roads. This number is revised annually to incorporate abandoned roads, newly constructed or accepted roads, and to reflect changes to the city road maintenance obligations. NRS 365-580, Section 8, requires the city to annually certify and submit to NDOT a list of the improved roads or streets maintained by Carson City, as well as the total mileage for those roads or streets. NDOT uses this submission to calculate annual motor fuel tax revenue. As of December 31st, 2021, Carson City maintains 303.73 centerline miles of improved roads. That
Thank
concludes
you.
my
Does anyone have any questions?
Yep. Kelly, this is Greg. I was checking the map out, and I guess we don't have the NDOT roads or the private roads, but I wasn't sure. Is 5th Street over by the prisons, corporate yard, is that NDOT's or Carson? It shows it's not Carson City at this point.
Well, thank you, Greg, for that question. I can certainly check the database for you and get back to you. Over the last 2 or 3 years, including this year, we've extensively gone through each segment of road and for its ownership. I'll make sure to review that one.
Okay, I wasn't sure. It could be either one, so I just wasn't sure.
We improved it. We did a big parking lot project with the 5th Street Prison there, and did a sharing document, so you're probably going to see it, dot, us, them, anyway. You can just email the results, please, and then we can post it as a late material answer for anyone that might be listening. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yep, Madam Chair, I had a similar question, but with different roads. I was just wondering, since we include this type 3 roads, which are, graded gravel essentially, I was just curious why the piece of road up by the big black pit, up Gonai Road, wasn't included. And we include Kings Canyon Road above the recent project, but there's no way that meets type C criteria as outlined in the staff report. So I know Chris was going to look into that.
Do you already have the answer for that, Mr. Martinovich?
So,
I can jump in. Sorry. Thanks.
Got that one.
Commissioner McQuarrie. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Manager. I know Kelly knows this answer. Certainly on Kings Canyon, that road is maintained by the Parks Department and the city, and they're undertaking a project right now to improve that whole section of road. which will bring it up to that type C standard. That's why it's included. It'll have new culverts and ditches and a whole variety of improvements. The part there on Gonai, the area that goes to the black cinder light pit and the red pit up there, that is not Carson City owned or Carson City maintained. Must be in the federal government or some other entity, but that's not us. The path that goes, the road that continues off to the north to the west, that's the road we do maintain. That goes to our radio tower up there on the top of the mountain. So we do need access to that road.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So then the only one we have that we're not sure of is right in front of our corporate yard off of Fifth Street there into the water plant, or not water plant, wastewater treatment, WRF. We call it WRF. We'll get the new acronym for that one. So again, you can get back to us on the WRF one. Would it change the result of this report for the needs? No.
Very minor.
It wouldn't matter in the overall scheme of what we're doing. Okay. And then if there's no issue with that, I will accept a motion then, as required. Ms. Schutte?
I move to certify that Carson City maintains the improved roads or streets identified in the Carson City Road Inventory as presented with the potential inclusion of the Fifth Street segment.
I will second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for the inventory as presented with the option to update if necessary for the Fifth Street. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 5B, which is a discussion and possible action on amendment number 3 with Ecolane. Are you going to take us through this one? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alex Cruz, Transit Coordinator. Jump Around Carson has had a contract with Ecolane to be their transit software since 2015. That includes 2 contract extensions. This amendment would extend that contract for 1 more year through December 17th of 2022. Staff are currently evaluating computer-aided dispatch, automatic vehicle location software companies to pair with the previously approved additions of the contactless fare payment system, the automatic people counters or passenger counters, and also the Wi-Fi for all the buses. This amendment would kind of act as a bridge for staff to keep Jack and Jack Assist operating until those new softwares are chosen and implemented. I also want to point everyone to packet page 16, where it states that the local match is 50% with $3,347.50 of the contract being local match. It's actually only a 20% local match, so it would only be $1,339. With that, I can answer any questions regarding the amendment.
Do you have any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion, please. It's always good when the match gets last. That was a good direction. Thank you.
I move to approve amendment number 3 as presented and to authorize the transportation manager to execute the amendment.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We're now going to move on to agenda item 6. And again, if you can briefly take us through that, Mr. Martinovich, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I have one item for the Transportation Manager's Report. I just want to take the opportunity to welcome Brian Byrne, who's back in our audience. He's our new Transportation Traffic Engineer. So it's exciting. Our other Safe Routes to School Coordinator will start on Monday, so we'll have a full team beginning next week. So we're excited to have that. Looking forward to that.
Welcome.
The other items in item 6, the street operations report is included for your review and reference. Happy to answer questions. And then item 6C, our project status report. I can bring this certainly back next month if we wanted to go into more detail, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has in it, but I was going to not go through every individual project at this particular meeting. So happy to bring it back if that's what the pleasure of the board. Thank you.
Perfect. Do you have a specific question you wanted to?
No, Chris, this is Greg. Yeah, I looked all the way through, and it was a very good report, but I did have some little questions or comments, and
Perfect.
bring it back next month.
I can bring it back next month. You
Perfect.
betcha.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it, you guys. We're going to make this right on time. We're good. Okay, do I have any final public comment on the phone?
There are no callers on the line at this time.
Do I have any public comment in the audience? Other than I'll just say it to all of you. Welcome very We're so excited to have you. Thank you for a great job tonight. Seeing no other public comment, going on. We're adjourned. Thank you all so very much for your attention and reading your packets and being prepared for the meeting. That is extremely helpful. Thank you. And have a great time and